A crying K9 begs police to follow him. What they found shocked everyone. It starts with a storm, a rookie cop on her first lonely night shift, and a dog pounding on the station door like he's begging for help. His paws are torn, his eyes desperate. But when she opens that door, he runs into the darkness. She shouldn't follow. But something about the way he cries feels human, feels urgent. Down in the rain-soaked quarry, she finds a wrecked truck, and something inside that should have stayed buried. The department says to drop it. Her captain says to forget. But the dog won't stop crying. And the closer she gets, the more she realizes he's not just leading her to a crime scene. He's leading her into a cover-up someone would kill to keep hidden. Because this K9 isn't lost. He's trying to finish what his partner started. When loyalty becomes dangerous and truth bleeds through the rain, will she dare to follow him one more time? Or will she become the next name they try to erase? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The rain hammered against the windows of Bracken River Police Station like angry fists, creating rivers of water that distorted the view of the empty parking lot outside. June Carver sat at the front desk, her fingers drumming against the worn surface as she watched another night shift crawl towards its end. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the empty lobby. She glanced at her watch. 11:45 p.m. 15 more minutes until she could officially start closing up. Lightning flashed outside, followed by a crack of thunder that made the windows rattle in their frames. Another exciting night in the life of Officer Tugreen, she muttered to herself, using the nickname she'd overheard the senior officers calling her behind her back. 6 months on the force, and they still treated her like she was fresh out of the academy. June knew she was capable of more than manning the front desk during the graveyard shift, but convincing her superiors of that fact seemed impossible. The storm outside grew fiercer, wind howling through the gaps in the weather stripping. June started her end-of-shift routine, checking that the filing cabinets were locked and organizing the scattered paperwork on the desk. She was halfway through straightening a stack of incident reports when movement caught her eye. Through the glass doors, a large shape emerged from the darkness. June's hand instinctively moved to her hip, but she relaxed slightly as the figure came into focus. It was a dog, a German Shepherd, to be precise, standing in the rain outside the station. The animal's fur was matted with mud and rain, and even through the glass, June could see it was shaking. The dog placed its paws against the door, letting out a high-pitched whine that was audible even over the storm. Its amber eyes locked onto June with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. Something about that gaze seemed almost human in its desperation. "Hey there, buddy," June said softly, approaching the door. The dog's tail gave a single wag of recognition, but its posture remained tense and alert. As she got closer, June could make out a metal tag hanging from the dog's scorched collar. The text was simple. K9 Hank. "You're a police dog?" June murmured, her brow furrowing. She didn't recognize him from the K9 unit, and his collar looked like it had been through hell. The burn marks on the leather made her stomach twist with concern. Hank barked sharply, the sound echoing through the empty lobby. He pawed at the glass again, leaving muddy streaks on the clean surface. June knew she should follow protocol, call animal control, file a report, wait for someone higher up the chain of command to make a decision. That's what a good probationary officer would do. But something in those amber eyes made her hesitate. This wasn't just some stray looking for shelter from the storm. This dog was trying to tell her something. "I'm probably going to regret this," June muttered, reaching for the door handle. As soon as she cracked it open, Hank backed away, barking with renewed urgency. Rain whipped into the lobby, soaking June's uniform, but she barely noticed. The German Shepherd took several steps into the parking lot, then turned back to look at her expectantly. The responsible thing would be to close the door, finish her shift, and let someone else deal with this tomorrow. Sergeant Mills's words from her last performance review echoed in her head. "You need to learn to follow procedure, Carver. Stop trying to be a hero." Hank barked again, the sound carrying a note of desperation that made June's decision for her. She grabbed her rain jacket from the coat rack and pulled it on, checking that her flashlight and radio were secure on her belt. "Wait right there," she called to Hank, as she quickly scribbled a note explaining her absence. She knew she was breaking at least 3 department regulations by leaving her post, but something told her this was more important than rules right now. The rain hit her like a wall of ice water as she stepped outside, plastering her hair to her face within seconds. Hank was already trotting across the parking lot, his tail held high like a flag. He paused every few steps to make sure she was following, his ears perked forward with determination. "I must be crazy," June said to herself as she followed the dog into the storm. Lightning split the sky again, illuminating the empty streets of Bracken River in stark white flashes. The industrial town looked almost ghostly in the storm, its abandoned factories and warehouses looming like ancient ruins against the turbulent sky. Hank led her past the station's parking lot and down Mason Street, moving with purpose despite his noticeable limp. June kept pace, her boots splashing through, puddles that reflected the stuttering streetlights above. The rain was relentless, drumming against her jacket and running in streams down her neck, but she pressed on. They passed the old mill, its broken windows gaping like hollow eyes in the darkness. June's flashlight beam caught the "No Trespassing" signs that hung from the chain-link fence. Their red letters faded by years of exposure. Hank didn't slow down, leading her deeper into the industrial district where the streetlights grew fewer and the shadows deeper. "Where are you taking me, boy?" June called out, her voice nearly lost in the howling wind. The German Shepherd glanced back at her, his eyes reflecting the beam of her flashlight like twin flames in the darkness. There was an intelligence in that gaze that sent a shiver down June's spine. This wasn't some random occurrence. Hank knew exactly where he was going. The rain continued to pour as they made their way through the maze of abandoned buildings and overgrown lots. June's uniform was completely soaked now, her boots squelching with every step. She could feel the weight of her radio, uselessly heavy on her belt. She was well out of range of the station now, in a part of town that hadn't seen regular patrols in years. Hank's pace quickened as they approached what looked like an old storage facility. The chain-link fence surrounding it was partially collapsed, creating a gap just large enough for someone to slip through. The dog squeezed through without hesitation, turning back to make sure June was still with him. She paused at the fence, her flashlight beam playing across the weathered private property sign. Every instinct from her training told her to turn back, to call for backup, to follow procedure. But Hank's insistent whine cut through her doubts like a knife through fog. This damaged, determined dog had sought her out specifically, had led her through this storm for a reason. Taking a deep breath, June squeezed through the gap in the fence, feeling the rusty metal snag at her jacket. Her boots crunched on broken glass and gravel as she followed Hank towards the main building. The structure loomed before them, a hulking shadow against the storm-dark sky. The German Shepherd stopped at a side door, pawing at its rusted surface and looking back at June with those haunting amber eyes. She approached slowly, her flashlight revealing deep scratch marks in the metal around the handle, evidence that Hank had been here before, perhaps many times. "What are you trying to show me?" June whispered, more to herself than to the dog. Hank's only response was another whine, more urgent than before. The storm raged around them, but in that moment, June felt oddly calm. Whatever waited behind that door, she knew she had made the right choice in following this mysterious K9 into the night. She reached for the handle, her fingers closing around the cold metal as another flash of lightning illuminated the scene. In that brief, brilliant moment, June caught a glimpse of something that made her heart skip a beat. A small splash of color on the ground near the door, partially hidden by debris. Even in the poor light, she could tell it wasn't rust or mud. Hank pressed against her leg, his wet fur soaking through her uniform pants, but she barely noticed. The German Shepherd's presence was oddly reassuring as she stood there in the rain, one hand on the door handle, knowing that whatever she discovered next would change everything. The storm continued its assault on Bracken River, but June Carver, the officer everyone dismissed as too green, too soft for real police work, stood firm. She had followed her instincts rather than procedure, trusted this mysterious K9 rather than protocol. Now, standing in the rain outside this abandoned building, she knew there was no turning back. Following Hank's determined lead, June made her way through Bracken River's maze of back roads. The rain had transformed familiar streets into glistening rivers, making each step treacherous. The German Shepherd moved with purpose, occasionally glancing back to ensure she kept pace, his dark fur plastered against his muscular frame. The industrial district gave way to increasingly remote terrain as they approached the old quarry area. Massive concrete walls rose on either side, creating a canyon of human construction. Water cascaded down these artificial cliffs in sheets, creating an eerie curtain effect in June's flashlight beam. "Slow down, boy," June called out, her boots slipping slightly on the slick pavement. The dog responded immediately, reducing his pace but maintaining his determined heading. The wind howled through the narrow passage, carrying with it the musty scent of wet concrete and something else, something acrid and chemical that made June's nose wrinkle. As they rounded a sharp bend, Hank suddenly stopped, his posture becoming rigid. June's flashlight beam caught the reason why, beneath the looming overpass ahead, partially hidden by shadow and rain, sat a pickup truck. But something was wrong with its silhouette. The vehicle appeared warped, its once straight lines twisted into grotesque shapes. June approached cautiously, her training taking over as she scanned the area for any immediate threats. The truck had been burned, its once blue paint now a nightmare of bubbled and blackened metal. The heat had been intense enough to melt the headlights into distorted puddles of plastic. The air still carried traces of that acrid smell, accelerant, she realized. This was no accident. Hank circled the vehicle, whining softly. June followed, her flashlight revealing more details of the destruction. The truck's bed contained the charred remains of what might have been equipment or furniture. It was impossible to tell now. The driver's side door hung open at an awkward angle, its window reduced to a puddle of glass on the ground. Something caught the light inside the cab, a glint of metal that seemed out of place among the destruction. June leaned in closer, careful not to touch anything. There, partially melted into what remained of the dashboard, was a police badge. Her heart nearly stopped as she made out the name through the damage. Detective Orrin Pike. "That's impossible," she whispered to herself. Pike had died weeks ago. At least that's what everyone had been told. The official story had been vague. An accident during an investigation. Body never recovered. But here was his badge, in a deliberately torched vehicle under an overpass. A sudden bark from Hank shattered her thoughts. The dog had moved beyond the truck and was pawing at something in the darkness. June swung her flashlight in that direction and felt her blood run cold. A man lay crumpled against the concrete wall, his clothes soaked through with rain and something darker. His hands were bound behind his back with thick zip ties that had cut into his wrists. June rushed forward, her radio already in hand. "Dispatch, this is Officer Carver. I need immediate medical assistance at the North Quarry Overpass. Male victim, approximately 45 years old, bound and injured. Possible assault victim." The man's eyes fluttered open as she knelt beside him. His face was bruised, one eye swollen shut, but he managed to focus on her with his good eye. "Help," he croaked, his voice barely audible over the rain. "I'm Officer June Carver," she said, already shrugging off her jacket to cover him. "Can you tell me your name?" Neil Harrow," he managed. "Building inspector. They said I knew too much." June's training warred with procedure. She should wait for backup, secure the scene, maintain distance. But the man was shivering violently, his skin cold to the touch. Hypothermia was setting in. "I'm going to cut these ties," she told him, pulling out her pocket knife. "Try not to move." Hank positioned himself on Harrow's other side, pressing close as if trying to share his warmth. The dog's presence seemed to calm the injured man, whose breathing became slightly steadier. "Dispatch, be advised victim is Neil Harrow, city building inspector, suffering from exposure and possible assault injuries. What's the ETA on that ambulance?" The radio crackled. 10 minutes out, Officer Carver. You were instructed to remain at the station. Please explain your current location and situation." June gently freed Harrow's hands, noting the deep abrasions from the zip ties. "Responded to signs of distress. Discovered assault victim requiring immediate assistance. Will file full report after medical aid is rendered." She knew she'd face consequences for this, but looking at Harrow's battered face and the burned-out truck containing Pike's badge, she knew she'd made the right choice. Something very wrong was happening in Bracken River. Something that had nearly killed this man and might have claimed Detective Pike. The rain continued to fall as June monitored Harrow's vital signs, keeping him talking to prevent him from slipping into unconsciousness. Hank remained steadfast beside them, his amber eyes alert for any threat. The dog's dedication struck June as remarkable. He'd led her straight to this scene, as if he'd known exactly where to find this victim. In the distance, sirens began to wail. June looked down at Harrow, who had begun to shiver less violently under her jacket. "Help's coming," she assured him. "You're going to be okay." "They'll try again," Harrow whispered. "Like Pike, have to tell someone." "Try to save your strength," June said, but her mind was racing. Pike's name again. This couldn't be coincidence. The detective's last case had involved building code violations, she remembered. Something about fraudulent emergency repair permits. Had Harrow been involved in that investigation? The ambulance's flashing lights began to illuminate the overpass, casting strange shadows through the curtain of rain. Hank pressed closer to Harrow, and June realized the dog had no intention of leaving the injured man's side. There was a story here, one that someone had tried very hard to bury. First with Pike's disappearance, now with Harrow's attempted murder. As the paramedics approached with their equipment, June stood back but remained close. She watched them work, her mind already composing the report she'd have to file. She knew she'd broken procedure by leaving her post, by following a mysterious K-9 unit into the night. But looking at Neil Harrow's battered but living form, at Pike's melted badge in the burned-out truck, at the loyal dog who'd led her to this scene, she knew that sometimes doing the right thing meant breaking the rules. The rain continued to fall on Bracken River, washing away evidence with every drop. But some truths couldn't be washed away. They lived in melted badges, in zip-tied wrists, in the unwavering loyalty of a German shepherd who refused to let the darkness win. June Carver had started her shift as just another rookie cop. She was ending it as something else entirely. someone who had seen behind the curtain and couldn't look away. The fluorescent lights of the police station buzzed harshly as June sat in the hard plastic chair outside Captain Devereux's office. Her uniform was still damp from the night's rain, and exhaustion pressed heavily against her shoulders. Through the window, the gray morning light did little to lift the shadows under her eyes. The door swung open. "Officer Carver." Captain Devereux's voice carried the weight of authority. "Come in." June rose, her boots squeaking against the linoleum as she entered his office. The captain cut an imposing figure behind his desk, broad-shouldered, iron-gray hair perfectly combed, his uniform crisp despite the early hour. His face held the stern disappointment of a father about to lecture a wayward child. "Sit down." He gestured to the chair across from him. "I've reviewed your incident report from last night. Would you care to explain yourself?" June straightened her spine. "Sir, I responded to signs of distress. A K-9 unit." "A stray dog," Devereux interrupted, "led you to abandon your post during your shift, breaking direct orders to remain at the station. With respect, sir, that dog wore a department tag, and he led me to Neil Harrow, who nearly died. Who was drunk and crashed his truck?" Devereux's words cut through hers like a knife. "The man has a history of alcohol abuse. This isn't the first time he's wrapped his vehicle around something." June frowned. "Sir, he was bound with zip ties, and in Detective Pike's truck. That wreck hasn't been positively identified." The captain's eyes hardened. "It's junk, Officer Carver, nothing more, and you put yourself at unnecessary risk pursuing fairy tales in the rain. But sir, the badge I found has been logged into evidence." His tone left no room for discussion. "Your conduct last night was reckless and unprofessional. You endangered yourself and potentially compromised what might have been a crime scene by rushing in without backup." June's hands clenched in her lap. "I rendered emergency aid to an assault victim." "You made assumptions." Devereux stood, towering over his desk. "This department runs on procedure, Officer Carver. Without it, we have chaos. Your probationary period exists for a reason, to learn those procedures before you get yourself or someone else killed." He pulled a form from his desk drawer. "I'm issuing a formal reprimand for your actions. Additionally, the dog you brought in will be processed as unclaimed property and held at the municipal impound. But sir, he's clearly a police K-9, with no active handler and no current department registration." Devereux's pen scratched across the paper. "If no owner claims him within 72 hours, he'll be transferred to the county shelter." June felt sick. "He saved Neil Harrow's life." "He's a stray who interfered with police business." The captain slid the reprimand across his desk. "Sign here, acknowledging receipt." With trembling fingers, June signed her name. Everything about this felt wrong. Harrow's injuries, Pike's truck, the captain's dismissal of evidence. But she was just a rookie, her word against a decorated commander's. "Dismissed, Officer Carver." Devereux turned to his computer. "And consider this your only warning. Further violations will result in termination." June left his office, her mind spinning. In the hallway, she heard Hank's mournful howl echo from the direction of the impound cage. The sound tore at her heart. She made her way to dispatch, where Marta Bell sat at her usual station, headset around her neck. The older woman's dark curls were streaked with gray, her round glasses slightly smudged. She looked up as June approached. "Rough morning?" Marta asked softly. June glanced around, making sure they were alone. "I need to ask you something. About Detective Pike's case files." Marta's fingers stilled on her keyboard. "Those were sealed months ago." "By whom?" The dispatcher's eyes darted toward Devereux's office. "You know I can't discuss that." "Marta, please." June leaned closer, keeping her voice low. "A man nearly died last night. Something's not right here. Marta removed her glasses, cleaning them with nervous movements. The captain ordered them sealed personally, said it was to protect an ongoing investigation. She replaced her glasses. But Pike was looking into something big before he disappeared. Building code violations, emergency repair permits that didn't add up. The same things Neil Harrow would know about as a building inspector, June murmured. Be careful, June. Marta's voice was barely above a whisper. Some questions aren't meant to be asked. Not if you want to keep your badge. Another howl echoed through the station. Long, mournful, full of loss. June's chest ached at the sound. Hank knew something about Pike's disappearance, about Harrow's attack. But he was locked away, and she was alone with her suspicions. Through the window, she watched Captain Devereaux stride across the parking lot to his car, his shoulders straight, his step confident. How many other officers had he warned away from asking questions? How many files had been sealed, evidence dismissed as junk, witnesses written off as drunks or criminals? The truth was out there, hidden in burned metal and zip-tied wrists, in sealed files and a German shepherd's unwavering loyalty. June might be alone in pursuing it, might be risking her career and more, but she couldn't walk away. Not now. Not when lives hung in the balance. Hank's howls continued through the morning, each cry seeming to echo June's own growing certainty. Something was deeply wrong in Bracken River Police Department, and she might be the only one left willing to find out what it was. The dispatcher's tired eyes met June's. Whatever you're thinking of doing, Marta said softly, be smarter than Pike was. Some people have too much power to challenge directly. June nodded, her resolve hardening with each of Hank's distant cries. She was alone in this, yes, but sometimes one person willing to seek the truth was all it took to bring light to the darkness. She just had to figure out how to do it without ending up like Pike and Harrow. The morning sun finally broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the station floor. In the impound cage, Hank's howls spoke of loyalty and loss, of secrets buried but not forgotten. June straightened her rain-dampened uniform and headed for her patrol car. She had 72 hours before they took Hank away. 72 hours to find the truth he was trying so desperately to reveal. The midnight shift dragged on endlessly. June couldn't shake the sound of Hank's mournful howls from her mind. After most officers had gone home, she made her way down the dimly lit corridor toward the impound area. Her footsteps echoed against the concrete floor. The German shepherd's amber eyes locked onto her the moment she appeared. His tail gave a hesitant wag. June glanced around before approaching the chain-link gate. "Hey, buddy," she whispered, crouching down. Hank padded closer, pressing his nose through the fence. His collar still bore scorch marks, a silent testimony to whatever ordeal he'd survived. "I know you're trying to tell us something." June reached through the links to scratch behind his ears. "About Detective Pike, right?" At his partner's name, Hank whined softly. The sound broke June's heart. "I promise I'll figure out what happened to him." Her voice was fierce but quiet. "Whatever it takes." The dog's eyes seemed to hold such intelligence, such desperate need to communicate. June stayed with him for several minutes, offering gentle words and scratches until his anxious pacing settled. When she finally stood to leave, Hank didn't howl. He watched her with those knowing eyes, as if he understood she was on his side. Back at her desk, June pulled up the case file on Pike's disappearance. The official report was sparse. His truck found at the bottom of Miller's Quarry 6 weeks ago. No body recovered. Case closed as an apparent suicide. But nothing about it felt right. Her phone buzzed, a text from Marta. "Records room. Now." June found the dispatcher surrounded by stacks of hard drives and monitors. The glow of multiple screens cast blue shadows across her tired face. "I pulled every traffic cam feed I could find from the night Pike vanished," Marta explained in hushed tones. "Most were corrupted or accidentally deleted, but I found this." She typed rapidly, bringing up grainy footage. "This is the access road to Miller's Quarry, 9:15 p.m. June leaned closer. Through the rain-streaked night, headlights approached. As the vehicle passed under a street lamp, its profile was unmistakable. A police cruiser. "That's car 47, Marta said. "Devereaux's assigned vehicle." June's pulse quickened. But in his statement, he said he was across town at a community meeting until 10. "Exactly." Marta pulled up another clip. "Here he is again at 11:30, leaving the quarry access road. Almost 2 hours unaccounted for. The same night Pike disappeared." June's mind raced. "Can you save copies?" "Already done, hidden where they won't be accidentally deleted this time." Marta's voice was grim. "But June, be careful. Pike was investigating something big before he vanished. Building code violations, suspicious fires. Like the ones that kept happening at those condemned properties?" June remembered the string of blazes that had plagued Bracken River's abandoned buildings. "Properties that always seemed to get emergency repair funding afterward," Marta added meaningfully, "despite being marked for demolition." A noise in the hallway made them both freeze, but the footsteps passed by. "There's more," Marta continued, pulling up hospital records. "Neil Harrow regained consciousness an hour ago. He's been mumbling in and out of lucidity. The nurse who called it in said he keeps talking about fires." "What about them?" "He said they weren't accidents. Called them scheduled demolitions before he passed out again." Marta's fingers twisted nervously. "June, whatever's going on here, it goes deep. The kind of deep that gets people killed." June thought of Pike's melted badge in that burned truck, of Hank's scorched collar and desperate attempts to lead them to the truth, of Neil Harrow, zip-tied and left for dead. "I need to talk to Harrow," she said, "before someone makes sure he can't talk at all. 4th floor, room 412, but security's been doubled since he was admitted." Marta hesitated. "They're saying it's for his protection. Or to control who he talks to." June straightened up. "Can you get me the duty roster for hospital security tonight?" Marta was already typing. 2 officers posted, Reynolds and Matthews. She looked up grimly. "Both personally requested by Captain Devereaux." June's jaw tightened. Of course they were. "I need a distraction. Something to pull them away from that room, even for a few minutes." "Leave it to me." Marta's fingers flew across the keyboard. "But June, whatever Harrow tells you, be ready. The truth might be worse than we imagine." June nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities. The traffic cam footage was their first real proof, concrete evidence that Devereaux had lied about his whereabouts the night Pike vanished. But why? What was worth killing a detective over? She thought of all those convenient fires, the emergency funding that followed, the building inspector who knew too much. The pieces were there, forming a pattern she didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. 10 minutes, Marta said. "That's all I can probably buy you with Harrow. Make them count." June squeezed the dispatcher's shoulder in silent thanks. As she headed for her patrol car, she passed the impound area again. Hank stood at attention, watching her through the fence. His posture reminded her so much of Pike, straight-backed, vigilant, refusing to back down. "I'm getting closer," she whispered to the dog. "I promise." Hank's tail wagged once, slowly. In his amber eyes, June saw not just loyalty to a fallen partner, but faith in her. Faith that someone would finally expose the truth, no matter how ugly it might be. She thought of Devereaux's confident stride, his easy dismissals of evidence, the way he'd built his reputation on being Bracken River's incorruptible hero. But heroes didn't lurk at quarries on rainy nights. They didn't seal files and silence witnesses. The truth was out there, hidden in traffic cam footage, and a wounded man's feverish words, in the howls of a loyal dog and the ashes of suspicious fires. June would find it, piece by piece, no matter where it led. She checked her watch. 10 minutes to get answers from Neil Harrow. 10 minutes that might finally shed light on what had really happened to Detective Pike, and why a police captain would kill to keep it hidden. The hospital loomed ahead as June pulled into the parking lot. Somewhere in that building, a man had woken up with pieces of the puzzle she desperately needed to solve. She just hoped she could reach him before someone made sure those pieces were lost forever. June's heart pounded as she approached room 412. True to Marta's word, both guards were rushing toward the hospital's east wing, responding to a false alarm about a disturbance in the cafeteria. She had 10 minutes, maybe less. Inside, Neil Harrow lay propped up against white pillows, his face pale but alert. Dark bruises marked his wrists where the zip ties had cut into his skin. When he saw June's uniform, fear flickered across his features. "It's okay," June said softly, closing the door. "I'm the officer who found you. I need to understand what happened." Harrow's eyes darted to the window, then back to her. "They'll kill me if I talk." "Who? Captain Devereaux?" The name made him flinch. "You don't understand how deep this goes. The construction contracts, the emergency funds." His voice cracked. "I was supposed to sign off on them. Building inspector, right? But the numbers didn't add up." From the hallway came the distinct sound of nails clicking on linoleum. June turned to see Hank padding toward them, having somehow slipped his impound cage. The German Shepherd's presence seemed to calm Harrow. "That's Pike's dog," Harrow whispered. "He was there the day Pike confronted Devereaux about the kickbacks." "Tell me everything," June urged, pulling out her notepad while Hank settled vigilantly by the door. "It started with the condemned buildings," Harrow explained. "Properties marked for demolition would mysteriously catch fire. Then Devereaux's construction buddies would swoop in, claim it was an emergency, bypass the normal bidding process." His hands trembled. The repair contracts were inflated by hundreds of thousands of dollars, money that disappeared into offshore accounts. Hank began barking, his ears pricked forward at Harrow's words. The man's eyes widened. "Pike figured it out," he continued. "Traced the money, found proof of staged arsons. But before he could file the report..." Harrow swallowed hard. "They said he died in a car crash. Only there was no body." June's mind raced. "The badge we found in that burned truck, it was planted there recently, wasn't it?" "Had to be. They needed everyone to stop looking for Pike." Harrow glanced nervously at the door. But he knew too much about the fraud ring, about who was getting paid off. Suddenly, Harrow pressed his lips together and whistled, a distinct pattern of 3 short notes followed by 2 long ones. Hank's reaction was immediate and startling. The dog's entire body tensed, tail straight out, head cocked in recognition. "Pike's signal," Harrow explained softly. "He used it to call Hank during investigations." The German Shepherd whined, padding over to June's utility belt where she'd clipped Pike's burned badge. With surprising gentleness, Hank took the badge between his teeth and dropped it in her lap, pawing at it insistently. "He's trying to tell you something," Harrow said. "Pike was meticulous about evidence. That badge, there might be more to it than just metal and char marks." June turned the badge over carefully. In the filtered hospital light, she noticed something she'd missed before. Tiny scratches on the back, too uniform to be random damage. Hank's amber eyes remained fixed on the badge, his whole posture screaming urgency. In that moment, June felt the weight of her decision settling into place. She couldn't walk away from this, couldn't pretend she hadn't seen the corruption eating away at her department's core. "The official investigation is closed," she said quietly. "But you and I both know Pike deserves justice, and so do all the people hurt by this fraud." Harrow's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "They'll come after you next, like they came after me when I finally refused to sign those permits. Let them try." June's hand found Hank's fur, drawing strength from his solid presence. "I've got a pretty good partner watching my back." The German Shepherd pressed against her leg, his loyalty shifting to include her in its fierce protection. Together they would follow whatever trail Pike had left behind, no matter where it led. "I'll need to move you somewhere safer," June told Harrow. "Somewhere Devereux's people can't reach you. Will you trust me?" He studied her face, then looked at Hank. "Pike trusted you enough to lead you to me. That's good enough." From down the hall came the sound of returning footsteps, the guards back from their wild goose chase. June quickly tucked the badge away. "Rest now," she said. "I'll be back with a plan." As she and Hank slipped out through a service entrance, June's mind was already mapping out their next moves. They would have to work carefully, quietly, building their case piece by piece. But with Hank's instincts and her determination, they had a chance to finish what Pike had started. The German Shepherd padded silently beside her, no longer the frantic creature who'd appeared at the precinct door. Now he moved with purpose, every step in sync with hers. They were partners now, bound by a shared mission and the memory of a detective who'd sacrificed everything to expose the truth. June glanced down at her new partner. "Ready to get to work?" Hank's tail wagged once, decisive and sure. Together they walked into the rain-washed night, leaving behind the sterile hospital halls for the darker streets where answers waited to be found. The real investigation was just beginning. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Bracken River's east side as June followed Hank through a maze of abandoned streets. Her boots splashed through puddles left by the morning's rain, while the German Shepherd moved with determined purpose, occasionally looking back to ensure she kept pace. They passed boarded-up storefronts and empty lots until Hank stopped before a weathered stone building. St. Michael's Church rose before them, its Gothic spires reaching toward gathering storm clouds. Yellow condemnation notices plastered the heavy wooden doors, their edges curling from exposure to the elements. "This is where Pike volunteered?" June asked softly. Hank's tail wagged once in confirmation. He circled around to a side entrance where ivy had nearly consumed the stone steps. The door's padlock had long since rusted through, hanging uselessly from its chain. June pushed it open, wincing at the protesting creak of ancient hinges. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of light, filtering through broken stained glass. The wooden pews stood in silent rows, their varnish dulled by years of neglect. Papers and fallen hymnal pages scattered across the floor told stories of hasty abandonment when the building had been declared unsafe. Hank's nails clicked against the warped floorboards as he led June past the altar. In the sacristy, he began scratching at a section of flooring beneath an overturned vestment cabinet. June pulled out her flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom. "What have you found, boy?" Kneeling beside him, she ran her fingers along the edges of the floorboards until she felt a slight give. A trapdoor, cleverly concealed, opened to reveal a narrow crawl space below. The musty scent of damp earth and old wood wafted up. June hesitated only a moment before lowering herself down, her flashlight beam sweeping the cramped space. Hank followed, his body pressed close in the confined area. They crawled forward about 15 feet until the dog stopped, pawing at a spot where the packed earth had been recently disturbed. "Good boy," June whispered, beginning to dig with her hands. 6 inches down, her fingers struck metal. Working carefully, she unearthed a military-style ammunition box, its olive drab paint chipped but still intact. The padlock yielded easily to her multi-tool, and she lifted the lid with trembling fingers. Inside, protected by waterproof bags, lay dozens of photographs and documents. June's breath caught as she began examining them. Construction sites, burned buildings, official-looking papers covered in familiar signatures. Her flashlight beam revealed image after image of Captain Devereaux meeting with contractors in shadowy parking lots, exchanging envelopes. "Oh my God," she breathed. The photographs were methodically dated and labeled in what must have been Pike's precise handwriting. They showed a pattern spanning years: suspicious fires followed by emergency repair contracts awarded without proper bidding. The same companies appeared again and again, their invoices inflated far beyond reasonable costs. June's hands shook as she lifted out a thick manila envelope. Inside were bank statements showing wire transfers to offshore accounts, their amounts matching the inflated portions of the repair contracts. Names she recognized from City Hall appeared alongside figures that made her stomach turn. "This is why they tried to kill him," she whispered to Hank. "Pike wasn't investigating one corrupt cop. He found an entire network." The German Shepherd pressed against her side as she continued examining the contents. Newspaper clippings about suspicious fires, internal memos questioning bid processes, quickly buried by senior officials. A list of properties that had burned under identical circumstances, each one followed by lucrative emergency contracts. June pulled out her phone, carefully photographing each document. The flash illuminated the crawl space in brief bursts as she worked methodically, making sure every piece of evidence was preserved. Her hands trembled slightly as the scale of the conspiracy became clear. These weren't random acts of corruption. This was an organized criminal enterprise operating under the cover of law enforcement and city government. The arson ring had been systematically targeting properties, creating false emergencies to bypass normal contract procedures, and pocketing millions in fraudulent repair costs. "All those families displaced," June murmured, remembering news reports of the fires. "All those businesses destroyed. They made it look like a wave of accidents and random arsons, but it was calculated, every single one." A notation in Pike's handwriting caught her eye. "Follow the insurance money." Attached were copies of insurance claims showing the same adjuster signing off on every case, rushing through approvals without proper investigation. June's chest felt tight as she realized how deep this went. City officials, contractors, insurance companies, all working together to profit from deliberately set fires. And at the center of it all was Captain Devereaux, the decorated hero who'd built his reputation on leading emergency response efforts. Hank whined softly, his ears pricking toward the church above. June froze, listening intently, but heard only the settling of old wood. Still, the dog's warning reminded her they couldn't stay long. She quickly finished photographing the last documents, then carefully repacked the box. "We need to get this somewhere safe," she told Hank. "Somewhere they won't think to look." The German Shepherd led the way back through the crawl space. June emerged covered in dirt and cobwebs, but clutching evidence that could bring down an entire criminal empire. She replaced the trapdoor carefully, making sure it showed no signs of disturbance. As they made their way out of the church, June's mind raced. The photos and documents would need to be analyzed, connections mapped out, witnesses located. Pike had laid the groundwork, but bringing this conspiracy to light would take more than just evidence. They would need to find people willing to testify, to stand up against powerful figures who had already proven they would kill to keep their secrets. She looked down at Hank, who padded silently beside her through the gathering dusk. "Your partner was a hero," she said softly. "He gave everything to expose this. We won't let that sacrifice be for nothing." The German Shepherd's amber eyes met hers with solemn understanding. Together they moved through the abandoned streets, carrying proof of corruption that had festered in Bracken River's heart for years. The metal box felt heavy in June's arms, weighted with responsibility and truth that could no longer remain buried. The storage yard loomed before them, a maze of corrugated metal buildings gleaming dully under the security lights. June crouched behind a stack of empty pallets, studying the facility through her binoculars. Beside her, Marta Bell shifted nervously, checking her phone for the 100th time. "Are you sure about this?" Marta whispered. Her dispatch headset hung around her neck, a familiar comfort in unfamiliar territory. "If we're wrong..." "The photos don't lie," June replied softly. "Pike tracked shipments to this exact location, building number 17. She lowered the binoculars and looked at Hank, who lay silently between them, muscles tense and ready. "You good, boy?" The German Shepherd's ears twitched forward, his amber eyes fixed on the storage unit ahead. They had spent hours reviewing Pike's photographs, matching locations and faces. This facility appeared in multiple shots, always with the same unmarked van arriving late at night. "Backup's on standby," Marta confirmed, her voice barely audible. "Officers Kelly and Rodriguez. They're good people. They won't report to Devereaux first." June nodded, grateful for Marta's help in identifying trustworthy officers. The dispatcher had proven invaluable, using her years of experience to navigate the department's politics. Without her, June would never have managed to coordinate this operation. A vehicle's headlights swept across the yard. June pulled Marta lower behind the pallets as a white van crept past their position. Hank remained perfectly still, only his eyes tracking the movement. "Right on schedule," June breathed. The van matched the one from Pike's surveillance photos exactly, even down to the small dent in the rear bumper. They watched as the van backed up to Unit 17. Two men emerged from the cab, their movements purposeful and practiced. The first was tall and lean, wearing a leather jacket despite the warm night. His companion was shorter but powerfully built, with a shaved head that reflected the security lights. "That's Marcus Reeves and Tommy Chen," Marta whispered. "They used to work security for some of the construction companies in Pike's files." The men rolled up the storage unit's door with a metallic rattle. Inside, stacks of boxes were visible in the dim light. As they began unloading more boxes from the van, June raised her radio. "All units, subjects are on site and actively moving evidence. Stand by for my signal." Hank's muscles bunched beneath his fur. He understood the tension in June's voice, recognized the familiar pattern of an operation about to unfold. June placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Easy, partner," she murmured. "Almost time." They watched as Reeves and Chen carried box after box into the unit. Through her binoculars, June could make out dates and project numbers written on the sides, matching the coding system from the fraudulent contracts they'd discovered. "Those have to be the actual ledgers," she said, "the real numbers behind all those inflated invoices. This is what Pike was looking for." Marta nodded grimly. "Records that prove where all the money really went." When the men disappeared inside with another load, June made her decision. "All units, move in now. Remember, we need those records intact." She rose smoothly to her feet, drawing her weapon. "Hank, with me." The German Shepherd moved silently at her side as they approached the storage unit. They could hear Reeves and Chen talking inside, completely unaware of their presence. "Police! Hands where I can see them!" June's voice rang out with authority as she appeared in the doorway, weapon trained on the two men. Reeves and Chen froze, a box suspended between them. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Chen's eyes darted toward a duffel bag near the wall. Before he could take a step, Hank burst forward with a growl that echoed off the metal walls. The dog positioned himself between the men and the bag, hackles raised. "Don't even think about it," June warned. "On your knees, hands behind your heads." Officers Kelly and Rodriguez appeared at her shoulders, weapons drawn. The sound of additional police units approaching filled the night. "Should have known Pike's mutt would cause trouble eventually," Reeves spat as Rodriguez cuffed him. "Captain said we should have dealt with him after the fire." Hank's growl deepened, but he held his position. June felt a surge of pride in her four-legged partner's discipline. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Evidence technicians documented and cataloged every box. Preliminary examination confirmed what they'd suspected. Detailed records of the arson ring's operations, including payment schedules and lists of targeted properties. "This is it," June told Marta as they watched the technicians work. "Everything Pike needed to prove the conspiracy. With these records and the documents from the church—" "June!" Officer Kelly's urgent voice cut through her words. "You need to see this." In the duffel bag Hank had guarded so carefully, they found bundles of cash, bottles of accelerant, and a set of keys to city-owned properties. The physical evidence was overwhelming. As dawn began to paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, June allowed herself to feel the first stirrings of triumph. They had done it. They had found the proof needed to expose the corruption that had poisoned their department. Then she heard the familiar rumble of Captain Devereaux's SUV. He stepped out looking immaculate despite the early hour, his iron-gray hair perfectly combed. Two internal affairs investigators flanked him, their expressions grim. "Officer Carver," Devereaux's voice carried across the storage yard. "I'm afraid we have a problem." June's stomach clenched as she recognized the look in his eyes, the same cold calculation she'd seen when he'd dismissed Pike's death as an accident. "These gentlemen are here to investigate allegations of evidence tampering," Devereaux continued smoothly. "It seems someone spotted you entering this facility last night, hours before this raid. They have video footage." The internal affairs investigators moved forward, their badges catching the morning light. "We'll need you to surrender your weapon and come with us, Officer Carver." June stood frozen as understanding dawned. Devereaux had been ready for them. He'd known they were getting close, and had prepared his counter-move carefully. Hank pressed against her leg, a low growl building in his chest. Around them, the other officers shifted uncomfortably, uncertain whose orders to follow. "The records," June started to say, but Devereaux cut her off. "Will need to be examined carefully for authenticity," he said. "Given the circumstances, everything recovered here is now suspect." As the internal affairs officers approached with handcuffs ready, June met Devereaux's eyes. Behind his mask of concern, she saw satisfaction and warning. He had turned her moment of triumph into a trap, using the very system she served to discredit her. The sun rose fully over Bracken River, its light harsh and unforgiving on the storage yard where justice had slipped away with the night. June sat in her small kitchen, staring at her badge and gun lying on the scratched wooden table. The morning sunlight filtering through her curtains felt harsh and unforgiving. Her suspension papers lay beside them, the words, "Without pay, pending investigation," stamped in bold red letters across the top. Her hands trembled as she wrapped them around her coffee mug, now gone cold. She hadn't slept since Internal Affairs had questioned her for 6 straight hours. Their words still echoed in her mind. Evidence tampering, unauthorized investigation, insubordination. The phone rang, making her jump. She let it go to voicemail, expecting another reporter seeking comment on the corrupt rookie cop story Devereaux had carefully leaked to the press. Instead, Marta's worried voice filled the room. "June, you need to come in. Now it's about Hank." 20 minutes later, June stood in the back hallway of the precinct, her civilian clothes feeling wrong and awkward compared to her usual uniform. Marta pulled her into the empty dispatch office, closing the door quietly behind them. "They're going to kill him," Marta whispered, her face pale beneath her glasses. Devereaux pushed through paperwork this morning, labeling Hank as behaviorally unfit for service or adoption. He's scheduled for euthanasia next Tuesday. June felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "What? They can't. He's a trained police K-9. He's not even department property. He was Pike's partner." "Exactly." Marta's hands shook as she pulled a manila envelope from her desk drawer. "That's why Devereaux is moving so fast. He's using your suspension as justification, claiming Hank's aggressive behavior during the raid proves he's dangerous." June opened the envelope, scanning the documents inside. Each page bore Devereaux's signature, a mockery of official procedure used to eliminate one more piece of evidence against him. "There's something else." Marta glanced nervously at the door before continuing. "I've been digging through old files. Pike's case? It was never officially closed. Devereaux just buried it under administrative reviews until everyone stopped asking questions." June looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "The original case file is still active. Pike's body was never found, June. No dental records, no DNA confirmation, nothing. Just a burned-out car and Devereaux's word that Pike died in the crash." The implications hit June like a physical blow. If Pike's death had never been confirmed. "Here." Marta pressed a set of papers into June's hands. "Hank's impound documents. I made copies of everything, including the euthanasia order. Be careful with these. My login ID is on the access records." "Marta, you could lose your job. Maybe it's time someone did the right thing, whatever it costs." Marta's tired eyes held a spark of defiance. Pike tried to expose Devereaux's corruption, and look what happened to him. Now they want to silence the only witness who might lead someone to the truth. June studied the papers, her mind racing. 5 days. That's all we have until they put Hank down. 4, really. They won't wait until Tuesday if they can help it. Marta straightened her headset nervously. "Whatever you're going to do it fast. And June, watch your back. Rodriguez and Kelly were both reassigned this morning. Anyone who supported you at the raid is being scattered to different precincts." June folded the papers carefully, tucking them into her jacket. "Thank you, Marta. I mean it. Just find out what really happened to Pike, for all of us who kept quiet too long." As June left through the back door, she caught a glimpse of Devereaux in his office. He was standing at his window, phone to his ear, watching her with cold calculation. She forced herself to walk normally, fighting the urge to run. In the parking lot, she heard familiar barking from the direction of the impound kennels. Hank's voice, desperate and alone. Every instinct screamed at her to go to him, but she knew she was being watched. "Hold on, boy," she whispered. "Just hold on a little longer." Back in her apartment, June spread the documents across her kitchen table. The euthanasia order was carefully worded to seem routine, a simple matter of liability and resource management. But the speed of its processing revealed Devereaux's real concern. Hank was a living link to Pike, and to whatever the detective had discovered about the arson ring. June picked up her phone, scrolling through her contacts. Most of her fellow officers wouldn't risk their careers by helping her now. Some probably believed Devereux's accusations. Others would keep their heads down, protecting their pensions and families. She paused at Neil Harrow's number. The witness from the burned truck was still in protective custody, but he might know something about Pike's last days. Before she could dial, a text message appeared from an unknown number. "Need to talk about your dog problem. Corner of Maple and 3rd midnight. Come alone." June stared at the message, weighing the risk. It could be a trap, Devereux trying to catch her interfering with evidence. But if there was even a chance of saving Hank. She looked at the badge lying on her table, remembering Pike's melted one in the truck wreck. 2 good cops who tried to expose the truth, brought down by the same corrupt system. Now Hank's life hung in the balance, counting down the hours until Devereux could erase one more loose end. The sun was setting outside her window, painting the sky in shades of flame that reminded her too much of arson photos. June picked up the euthanasia order, reading Devereux's signature again. His careful script seemed to mock her, so confident in his power to destroy lives with a simple stroke of his pen. "Not this time," she whispered. "Not Hank. Whatever it takes, I'm not letting you win this one." She began gathering what she would need for the midnight meeting. Her backup weapon from the gun safe. A small recorder, the copied documents, a dark jacket that wouldn't reflect light. As she worked, Hank's desperate barking echoed in her memory. She thought of him lying in a cold kennel, waiting faithfully for a partner everyone believed was dead. A partner whose case had never officially closed. The truth was out there, hidden in the gaps between official reports and buried files. June had 4 days to find it before Devereux silenced their best witness forever. She checked her watch. 6 hours until midnight. "Hold on, Hank," she whispered again, touching the papers that held his death sentence. "I'm coming, I promise." Outside her window, the sunset faded to twilight. Somewhere in the gathering darkness, answers waited. June could only pray she'd find them in time to save the one creature who had never stopped searching for justice, even when everyone else had given up. The streetlights cast long shadows across June's front yard as she stepped out to check her mailbox one last time before heading to the midnight meeting. Her fingers trembled slightly as she inserted the key, fighting exhaustion after hours of planning. When the small door swung open, she froze. There, nestled among her regular mail, sat a cheap burner phone, still in its plastic packaging. No note, no explanation. Just the phone, deliberately placed where she would find it. June glanced up and down her quiet street, but saw only empty sidewalks and dark windows. With careful movements, she slipped the phone into her jacket pocket and walked back inside, double-checking that her curtains were drawn. In her kitchen, she opened the package and turned the basic flip phone over in her hands. It was already charged, with a single number programmed into its memory. As she studied it, the device suddenly vibrated, making her jump. Unknown number flashed on the tiny screen. June's heart pounded as she answered. "Hello? Officer Carver?" The voice was rough, weakened, but carried an unmistakable authority. "I hear you've been taking care of my partner." She sank into a kitchen chair, gripping the edge of her table. "Detective Pike? What's left of me?" A wheezing laugh turned into a cough. "Sorry about all the cloak and dagger stuff. Had to be sure you were trustworthy before making contact." "Everyone thinks you're dead." June's mind raced, piecing together the puzzle. "The burned truck? The badge? It was all staged?" "Not exactly." Pike's breathing was labored between words. "The attempt on my life was real enough. Devereux and his men caught me gathering evidence at the quarry. They tried to drown me in the overflow pond, left me for dead. I managed to drag myself out downstream." June remembered the detective's limp from their few previous encounters. But why stay hidden? Why let them think they succeeded? Because I needed time. Time to document everything, build an airtight case. Another coughing fit. And because I knew they'd keep watching anyone I contacted, I couldn't risk more deaths on my conscience. Like Neil Harrow? June asked. We found him tied up near your truck. Poor Neil. He was my informant inside the construction company Devereaux uses to launder money. They must have caught him trying to get me those final documents. Pike's voice hardened. How is he? Recovering under protection. He mentioned fires that weren't accidents. That's just the surface. Devereaux's been running this scheme for years. His men start fires in low-income areas, then funnel emergency repair contracts to shell companies they control. The insurance money, the disaster relief funds, it all goes through their network. June thought of the ledgers they'd seized in the raid. We found evidence, but Devereaux turned it around, made it look like I planted it. Of course he did. He's got half the department in his pocket, either through bribes or blackmail. Pike paused, and she heard him shifting position with a grunt of pain. But there's more. The real proof is still out there, hidden where they can't touch it. Where? The old powerhouse on River Street. There's a drop site inside, behind the main. Turbine housing. That's where they store the original documents before doctoring the copies for insurance claims. Account numbers, dates, names, everything needed to bring down the whole operation. June grabbed a pen, scribbling notes. When do they move the documents? Every Friday night, 3 a.m., they empty the drop box, replace it with next week's targets. Pike's voice grew urgent. Listen carefully, Carver. 2 days from now, they're planning something big. A whole block of historic buildings, timed to look like an electrical fire. The insurance payout alone would be in the millions. How can you be sure? Because I found their planning photos. The buildings are already rigged. They just need to create their alibis, same as always. He took a shaky breath. I should have stopped them sooner. Should have seen what Devereaux really was before he got his hook so deep into the department. June thought of Hank, alone in his kennel. It's not too late. We can still expose them. Maybe, but you'll need help. Real help. Not just a broken-down detective and a loyal dog. Pike coughed again. There's a federal task force investigating corruption patterns in Rust Belt towns. I've been feeding them information, building toward a coordinated raid, but we need those documents from the powerhouse to prove the pattern. Tell me what to do. Not over the phone. Meet me tomorrow night, 11 p.m., at St. Andrew's Shelter on 8th Street. I'll show you everything I've gathered. His voice softened. And Carver? Thank you. For believing in Hank when no one else would? He never gave up on you, June said, even when everyone else did. That's Hank. Stubborn as they come. Pike's attempt at a laugh turned into another coughing fit. Be careful who you trust between now and tomorrow. Devereaux's got eyes everywhere. The line went dead. June sat in her darkened kitchen, staring at the burner phone. Her mind spun with implications. Pike was alive. The corruption went deeper than anyone suspected. And somewhere in an abandoned powerhouse, the evidence waited that could bring it all crashing down. She checked her watch. 10:45 p.m. Just enough time to make the mysterious meeting at Maple and 3rd. Now she had to decide. Should she tell her midnight contact about Pike? Or play it close to the vest until she knew who else she could trust? The burner phone felt heavy in her pocket as she gathered her gear. Outside, clouds were gathering again, threatening another storm. June pulled on her dark jacket, checked her backup weapon, and headed for her car. Whatever waited at the midnight meeting, she had to be ready. Pike's survival had changed everything. The mystery wasn't just about saving Hank anymore. It was about finishing what the detective had started. about exposing a cancer that had eaten away at the department from within. As she drove through the quiet streets, June's resolve hardened. 4 days to save Hank. 3 days until the next. Document transfer. 2 days until more buildings burned. 1 chance to get it right. The dashboard clock ticked toward midnight as she parked a block from the meeting point. Thunder rumbled in the distance as she checked her weapon one final time. Whatever came next, she was committed now. No turning back. The remote trailer sat at the edge of an abandoned lot, its metal sides streaked with rust. June approached cautiously, Hank padding silently beside her. A dim light flickered through the grimy windows. She knocked twice, then 3 times, the pattern Pike had specified. The door creaked open, and June's breath caught. Detective Orrin Pike stood before her, but he was barely recognizable from his department photos. His once sturdy frame had grown gaunt, his face marked by a fresh scar that ran from temple to jaw. But his eyes burned with the same determination she remembered from news coverage of his biggest cases. "Come in quickly," Pike said, limping back from the doorway. "Can't risk being seen." The trailer's interior was sparse. A folding table covered in maps and photos, a worn couch that doubled as a bed, and a police scanner humming in the corner. Hank whined softly and pressed against Pike's leg. The detective's weathered face softened as he scratched behind the dog's ears. "Missed you too, boy," Pike murmured. "You did good, finding someone we could trust." June studied the wall of evidence Pike had assembled. "How did you survive?" Pike eased himself onto a metal chair, wincing. "Devereaux thought he'd finished the job, left me for dead in the quarry water. But Hank," he smiled at the dog, "this stubborn partner of mine pulled me out, got me to a cave where we used to train. I've been gathering evidence ever since." "Why come forward now?" "Because Devereaux's getting desperate. The feds are closing in, and he knows it." Pike pointed to a blueprint of the old powerhouse. "He's planning to destroy everything. The documents, the building, any trace that could lead back to him. Make it look like vandals started a fire." June felt her stomach tighten. "When?" "Tomorrow night. He'll have his usual crew create alibis while a separate team handles the destruction." Pike's hand shook slightly as he spread out more photos. "We've got 1 chance to intercept those documents before they're gone forever." June studied the powerhouse layout. "We'll need backup, someone we can trust completely." "You have someone in mind?" She nodded, pulling out her phone. "Cal Whitaker, the paramedic who helped me with Neil Harrow. He's seen enough of Devereaux's handiwork to know something's wrong." Pike considered this. "A medic could be useful, especially in my condition. Make the call." June dialed, and Cal answered on the second ring. She explained the situation in clipped sentences, watching Pike's face for any sign of disapproval. But the detective remained focused on the blueprints, marking entry points and escape routes. "I'll be there," Cal said, without hesitation. "Just tell me when and where." They spent the next hour planning their approach. Pike's intimate knowledge of the powerhouse layout proved invaluable. He'd spent weeks studying patrol patterns, shift changes, every detail that might give them an edge. "The documents are here," Pike said, tapping a spot on the blueprint. "Behind the main turbine housing. We'll need to time this perfectly. Get in after their regular patrol, but before the demolition team arrives." June watched him struggle to stand, leaning heavily on his good leg. "Are you sure you're up for this?" Pike's jaw set in a hard line. "Have to be. Too many people have suffered while Devereaux lined his pockets. Good people lost homes, businesses, lives, all so he could collect on fraudulent claims." Hank pressed against Pike's side, offering support. The detective absently stroked the dog's head. "Besides, I owe it to my partner here. He never gave up on me. Time I returned the favor. They finalized their plans as dawn approached. Cal would park his personal vehicle near the powerhouse, ready to move if things went wrong. June and Pike would approach from different directions, with Hank acting as their early warning system. "One shot at this," Pike said as June prepared to leave. "If we fail..." "We won't," June said firmly. "Together we're stronger than Devereaux's whole corrupt machine." Pike nodded, his tired face showing a glimmer of hope. "You know, when Hank first found you, I wasn't sure. Thought maybe he'd lost his edge, trusting a rookie." He smiled slightly. "I was wrong. He knew exactly what we needed." June knelt to hug Hank, drawing strength from his solid presence. This loyal dog had brought them together. A young officer who refused to look away from corruption, a broken detective fighting for redemption, and a paramedic who'd chosen to stand for what was right. As she drove home through the brightening morning, June felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were no longer fighting alone. Tomorrow night would bring either triumph or disaster, but at least they would face it together. Lightning crackled across the night sky, illuminating the abandoned powerhouse in stark flashes of white. June crouched behind a rusted generator, her heart pounding as rain pelted her face. Next to her, Pike checked his weapon while Hank remained perfectly still, ears forward and alert. "Security patrol just passed," June whispered, checking her watch. "We've got 15 minutes before they circle back." Pike nodded, his face tight with pain from his old injuries. "The document storage is through the turbine room. Stay close to the walls. Those catwalks aren't as stable as they used to be." They moved as one unit, their footsteps masked by the storm. Hank led the way, his nose working the air currents. The dog's training showed in every careful movement, each pause to check corners before proceeding. The first sign something was wrong came when they reached the main floor. Smoke, thin but unmistakable, drifted from beneath a heavy metal door. "No," Pike breathed. "They're ahead of schedule." June shouldered the door open, and acrid smoke billowed out. Through the haze, they could see flames already consuming stacks of papers and files. But worse than the fire was the steady rush of water pouring through the sluice gates. "They're flooding it," June realized. "The whole basement level will be underwater in minutes." Pike cursed softly. "The gates are controlled from that upper platform. If we can..." A gunshot cracked through the air. The bullet sparked off metal inches from June's head. She dove behind a concrete pillar as more shots followed. "Well, well," Captain Devereaux's voice echoed through the chamber. "Detective Pike, back from the dead, and Officer Carver, still refusing to learn your place." June risked a glance around the pillar. Devereaux stood on the upper catwalk, flanked by 2 armed men. More figures moved in the shadows behind them. "It's over, Devereaux!" Pike shouted back. "We've got copies of everything. The feds are already moving." "Then I suppose we'll have to make this look like a tragic accident. 3 trespassers, caught in an unfortunate structural collapse." More gunfire erupted. June and Pike split up, staying low as they worked their way toward different staircases. Hank stayed with June, his body tense and ready. The catwalks groaned overhead as Devereaux's men gave chase. Rust flaked away with each impact of their boots. June reached the 2nd level, but a bullet struck the railing beside her. She stumbled, nearly falling, as the metal support gave way. "June!" Pike's voice carried over the chaos. He had reached the control panel for the sluice gates, but 2 gunmen were closing in on him. Making a split-second decision, Pike turned and charged them. The sudden attack caught them off guard. As they grappled, Pike managed to slam one man into the wall, but the other raised his weapon. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. Pike staggered, red blooming across his shirt. But his momentum carried both him and his attacker into the 2nd man. All three crashed through the weakened railing. The gunman fell screaming into the churning water below. Pike caught himself on a lower beam, hanging by one arm as blood soaked his side. "Pike!" June started toward him, but Devereaux's voice stopped her cold. "Don't move, Officer Carver." She turned to find him 10 feet away, gun aimed at her heart. Behind her, she heard a terrified yelp. Hank had tried to reach Pike, but the rusted beam beneath him had given way. The loyal dog now dangled by his front paws over the rushing water, scrambling desperately for purchase. June stood frozen, torn between the wounded detective and the struggling dog. Both had saved her life. Both had trusted her. And now both were seconds from death. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the scene in stark relief. Pike's blood dripping into the flood. Below, Hank's claws scoring deep grooves in the metal as he fought to hold on, and Devereaux's cold smile as he kept his weapon trained on June. The storm's fury matched the turmoil in June's heart as she faced this impossible choice. The next few seconds would determine all their fates. With her heart pounding, June made her choice. She lunged toward Hank, dropping to her stomach on the catwalk. Her fingers closed around his collar just as his back paws lost their grip completely. "I've got you, boy," she grunted, straining against his weight. The metal groaned beneath them as she pulled him up inch by inch. Hank whimpered, his claws scraping desperately against the beam. With one final heave, she dragged him to safety. The German shepherd pressed against her, shaking but alive. "How touching." Devereaux's voice dripped with contempt. He stepped closer, his gun unwavering. "You know, I did everything for this town. Every fire, every accident. It all fed money back into Bracken River. The insurance payouts, the reconstruction contracts. I made this place prosper." June's hand slowly moved to her chest, where her body camera blinked silently. Devereaux didn't notice, too caught up in his rant. Someone had to take control, make the hard choices. These people needed a savior, even if they didn't know it. And I gave them one. Through fire. The confession was recording, but before June could activate her radio, Devereaux's eyes narrowed. He fired twice at the overhead lights, plunging them into darkness broken only by emergency exit signs. In that moment of blindness, Hank sprang. His powerful jaws clamped onto Devereaux's gun arm, earning a howl of pain. June seized the opportunity, ramming her shoulder into the captain's chest. The impact drove him backward into the sluice control lever. Devereaux stumbled, off balance. His free hand grabbed wildly at the railing, but the rusted metal gave way with a shriek of tortured steel. The wail of sirens pierced the night as red and blue lights flooded the powerhouse yard. Cal's ambulance skidded to a stop in the gravel, followed by a convoy of police cruisers. The paramedic team rushed out with their gear, making straight for Pike, who lay propped against a concrete pillar. "You're one tough customer," Cal said, quickly assessing Pike's wound. "Let's get you patched up." June watched as officers led Devereaux and his men away in handcuffs, their faces illuminated by the flashing lights. The captain's usual commanding presence had crumbled, replaced by a defeated slump. Pike caught June's hand as the medics prepared to load him onto a stretcher. "You did it," he whispered, his voice rough with pain but proud. "You finished what I couldn't." "We did it," June corrected, glancing at Hank, who sat faithfully by Pike's side. "All of us." Back at the station, June submitted the evidence drive and played Devereaux's recorded confession for the investigators. The footage was damning. His words about orchestrating fires and fraud echoed through the conference room, leaving no room for doubt. The scandal rocked the department. News vans camped outside the precinct for days as the story broke. But amidst the chaos and disgrace, June's unwavering commitment to the truth stood out. Officers who had once dismissed her now nodded with respect when she passed. "Integrity under pressure," the chief said at the press conference. "That's what real police work looks like." 3 weeks after the Powerhouse showdown, June stood in her freshly pressed uniform before the polished wooden podium at City Hall. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting warm patterns across the ceremony floor. Her reinstatement badge gleamed in its presentation box, but her attention kept drifting to the double doors leading outside. Through the glass, she could see Hank sitting at attention, his new collar catching the morning light. The tag read, "Partner," in bold letters, a far cry from his days in the impound cage. His amber eyes watched her proudly, tail thumping against the concrete steps. After the ceremony, June drove to St. Mary's Hospital, where Pike was recovering in the rehabilitation wing. His room was bright with get-well cards and the afternoon sun. "The department's changing," she told him, settling into the chair beside his bed. "We're making sure truth has a place in Bracken River again." Pike nodded, some of the old strength returning to his weathered face. "You proved it already." Outside the hospital, Cal waited by his truck, off duty for once and wearing civilian clothes instead of his paramedic uniform. "How about that coffee?" he asked with a warm smile. "No badges, no sirens, just coffee." June looked down at Hank, who gave an encouraging bark that echoed across the parking lot. "You know what?" she said, feeling the weight of the past months finally lifting. "I'd like that." Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.